In 1843, a schoolteacher named Dorothea stood before the Massachusetts legislature and presented a report that would shock the state. It described the horrific abuses she had witnessed in local jails and asylums. In cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, her memorial to the legislature of Massachusetts forced America to look at a truth it had denied for centuries. She argued that madness was not a crime, but an illness that deserved kindness and proper treatment. Inspired by European reformers like Philippe Pinel, the asylum movement was more than a reform. It was a revolution that replaced fear with compassion. This reform ultimately paved the way for establishing modern institutions like the National Institute of Mental Health and for developing systematic standards for psychiatric treatment. To understand why Dix's work was so important, we must first understand what she was fighting against. For most of history, mental illness was not seen as a medical problem. Instead, it was viewed as a sign of imbalance, demonic possession, or punishment from God. Ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Hippocrates believed in humorism, the theory that the body contained four liquids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. As humorism was used to describe the state of mind, the belief that mental illness was an imbalance of the bodily fluids became deeply ingrained in society and was frequently intertwined with spiritual interpretation. In Western tradition, the Bible underpinned many cultural beliefs, including those about demonic possession. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 27 to 29, the Bible describes Jesus encountering an insane man who was possessed by demons. The man was casted out of the society, wore no clothes, and slept among the dead. This scripture characterized the mentally ill as isolated, irrational, and deformed. Similarly, the Duvernay Papyrus, oldest surviving manuscript of the Macedonian Greek philosophy, documented rituals, spells, and exorcisms. Both texts help establish supernatural explanations for mental illness throughout Western history. While most culture attributed mental illness to supernatural forces, people also sought treatments. Trephination, for example, was commonly used in the 16th century, where doctors used specialized tools to drill holes in the patient's skull to let out the evil spirits. Bethlehem Hospital, founded in London 1247, originally aided bishops and the Crusader Church. It was not until 1547 that Bethlehem began admitting patients with mental illness who had previously received care from monks and nuns. However, the creation of such institutions did not initially mean care. Rather, it was a form of social exclusion. Poorly funded and filled with impoverished patients, Bethlehem began allowing visitors by the 17th century, with poor boxes placed at the entrance for donations. From that point on, the hospital became more of a showplace. For as little as a penny, anyone could gain access to Bethlehem's wards in order to stare at, taunt, or abuse inmates. Even centuries after its founding, treatment at Bethlehem remained rooted in humorism. For example, schizophrenic patients were soaked in ice water to shock out the illness. Others were forced to spend weeks bleeding and vomiting to drain out imbalanced fluids. In the 1815 reports from the Committee on the State of Madhouses, British politician Edward Wakefield documented the case of William Norris, a Bethlehem patient who had been chained by the legs for 12 years despite giving rational and deliberate answers to every question put to him. Although Norris was eventually removed from restraints, he died shortly after. During the Enlightenment era in the late 17th century, the revival of ancient Greek and Roman thinking flourished across Europe and North America. This intellectual movement established a clear framework for the development of psychiatry, strongly advocating for rational, evidence-based approaches. French physician Philippe Pinel first reacted to this ideological revolution with his moral treatment movement, which envisioned asylums as places of safety for the mentally ill. Unlike the mainstream practices that chained patients to the wall, the moral treatment emphasized gentleness and understanding. In his treatise on mental alienization, Pinel described taking detailed notes through deep conversation and visiting patients multiple times a day. Pinel's revolutionary philosophy eventually crossed the Atlantic, though not by the hand of a fellow physician, but by a retired female teacher from a town in Massachusetts instead. Dorothea Lynn Dix was born in Hampton, Maine in 1802. Suffering from abusive parents, she soon moved to Worcester, Massachusetts to live with her grandmother. At age 14, she began educating young girls and continued her teaching career until the 1830s, when she was forced to step away due to major depression. During this time, she traveled to Europe with friends. In England, Dix encountered mental health advocates and learned about moral treatment. Upon Dix's return to Massachusetts in 1841, she began teaching Sunday school at East Hambridge Jail, where she witnessed patients being beaten, chained, and abused. Shocked by what she saw, Dix traveled from New Hampshire to Louisiana, documenting abuses in hospitals, prisons, and poorhouses. In 1843, Dix presented her findings to the Massachusetts legislature legislature. I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons within this commonwealth in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. Dix revealed stories of the mentally ill that were never made public and immediately brought attention through newspaper and pamphlets. If reform is intended to be united with punishment, there never was a greater absurdity than to look for moral restoration under such circumstances, and if that is left out of view, we know no rendering of the law which sanctions such a cruel and oppressive aggravation of the circumstances of imprisonment as to expose these prisoners day and night to the indescribable horrors of such association. Dorothea vehemently argued that it was inherently immoral to combine reform with punishment, since the mental health care system is already horribly cruel to the mentally ill. Ignoring this glaring reality is not merely oversight, it is substantially permitting brutality by law. Consequently, Dix insisted that true reform must target the annihilation of the laws that shielded the systemic abuse. Dix's report led the state to expand Worcester Asylum, one of America's first public mental hospitals. It applied the treatment moral Dix discovered at England's York Retreat, an approach emphasizing no restraint in occupational therapy like art and handicraft. These principles were directly reflected in its architectural design. Skylights were added to allow more sunlight into the galleries. Patients were encouraged to play golf and croquet, go to horseback and bicycle riding. The Design of Moral Architecture at the York Retreat, published by Oxford University Press in 2003, identified this reform as a revolutionary transformation that swayed over 19th century asylum design in England, Canada, and the USA. By introducing the treatment moral to America, Dix explicitly challenged the custodial model of asylums, fostering reform from confinement to psychological healing. In 1854, Dorothea Dix proposed the Bill for the Benefit of the Indigent Insane that requested the government to set aside 12,225,000 acres of the federal land, approximately the size of England, in which 10 million acres distributed for the insane, and the rest sold for the benefits of the blind, deaf, and dumb. The bill was supported by President Millard Fillmore but vetoed by following President Franklin Pierce, who argued, if Congress had the power to provide for the insane, people would assume it had the power to provide for the sane too. 4 years Miss Dix labored over this bill. With infinite difficulty it was steered through the Senate and Houses, only to be vetoed by President Pierce. This defeat was the blow of Miss Dix's life. She dropped her sacred work and, almost broken-hearted, went abroad for rest and recuperation. Despite the setback, Dix persisted. By 1880, she had helped establish 32 of the 123 mental hospitals in the U.S. Notable examples include the New Jersey State Hospital at Trenton, still operating today as a 400-bed psychiatric facility, the North Carolina Hospital for the Mentally Ill in Raleigh, now housing 682 patients, and Harrisburg State Hospital in Pennsylvania, which charged only $2 per week for the mentally ill while providing food and accommodations for soldiers during the Civil War. Within a decade, every U.S. state had at least one publicly supported asylum. What's more, Dix's effort contributed to the establishment of the National Institute of Mental Health in 1949. As part of the National Institutes of Health, it aims to develop effective strategies for promoting new treatments and preventing mental illness. Being the world's largest biomedical research agency, the NIMH annually supports over 3,000 research grants worldwide and shapes mental health policy. During the 1980s, for example, states began receiving block grants that included funding for alcohol, drug abuse, and mental health services. Yet, despite Dix's relentless effort, the ancient superstitions that she fought against never truly disappeared. Anneliese Michael, a young German woman who was diagnosed with psychosis-related epilepsy in the 1970s, was believed to have been possessed by multiple demons. At her family's request, Roman Catholic Bishop Joseph Stangl authorized exorcism in 1975. Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz conducted intense sessions twice a week, each lasting up to 4 hours. After 67 exorcisms, Anneliese died at age 23, weighing only 68 pounds, with signs of broken bones, bruises, and extreme starvation. Her tragic story inspired films such as The Exorcism of Emily Rose and served as a modern-day warning that individuals can still be harmed by misguided superstitions. By exposing the brutal reality of the mentally ill, Dorothea Dix's memorial to the legislature of Massachusetts replaced chains with care and opened the door to a monumental revolution in American psychiatric care. As Carl Sagan wrote, avoidable human misery is more often caused not so much much by stupidity as by ignorance. Mystics had dedicated her life to fighting that ignorance, which we still see in our society today. The revolution remains unfinished, not because she failed, but because such a fight can never be permanently won. Her reform, therefore, should not be condensed into a few paragraphs in history textbooks. It must be defended and carried forward in every generation. The revolution is not over. It is calling for us.